Hello there, students, and welcome to week 3. Dr. J there, and I hope you're enjoying the class. Hope you're having fun. I have gotten some great feedback from some students, and so I do appreciate hearing from you all. I know a number of students are enjoying the class, and maybe a little bit challenging than some of you were anticipating or have been used to in some of the other classes. I can tell you, generally speaking, in the 400 level, we generally have a little higher expectations for students in terms of writing quality and research quality and submission quality overall. And so be mindful of that moving forward into the program. And I'm going to give you some tips in addition to the overview. I'm going to give you some tips and insights that will just help you in terms of being a student overall in general, as well as providing a little feedback and understanding of some of the things that went on this past week and where we're at moving forward to help you all be successful in the class. And so one of the things that I wanted to share with you, just a tip or an insight, and I did a little quick search on Amazon to see, you're gonna say, why is Dr. J showing us pictures of printers? Because this is something I want you all to consider and think about. You can pick up a printer, 50 bucks, 60 bucks. I think I bought a printer for $39 that I use at one location. And it's funny because the ink from that initial purchase lasted quite a while because I don't use it that often, like 5 or 6 months. And so those are some of the things you want to think about in terms of helping you to be successful. Have a printer. Make sure you're able to easily print pages. So always have, some ink on hand to be able to do this. Recommend the refills, cheapest and easiest, but you can pick up a printer quite cheap. Probably get one for under 50 bucks if you search a little bit, Sam's Club, Costco, because what you might find sometimes is that you can print a couple of articles that you might have to read throughout the week, and you can take it with you very easily. I've been doing this for years, gang. I did it a lot in grad school. I would print everything at the beginning of the week just so I had all the stuff with me. I staple things together, and I just carry these with me easily if I'm waiting for an appointment, if I'm in between appointments, I'm on lunch break. I can easily pull out one of these, read 4 or 5 pages and get my readings done for the week. And because they're printed out, I can also highlight some things very easily or put some notes in the margins. And that just helps me to maximize my time. So I want you to start thinking about this, gang. You want to make sure that you're working efficiently in what you're doing so that moving forward, you can get through the readings, you can do the research, you can get things done, you can stay on top of your submissions. I want you all to know that last week was maybe a little bit lighter in comparison. This week's probably about average. Next week will be project 1. So make sure that you're working aggressively through the materials throughout the week so you don't run into a problem, late Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, when you realize you didn't budget enough time during the week, or you had some things that came up for you on Sunday, you weren't able to complete your submissions. So with that, let's dive in and talk about the submissions this week. I also want to do a little bit of coaching in terms of just having some general understandings of research and give you some ideas and some insights and hopefully some reminders on some things research-wise to help you be good consumers of the information, and maybe to see things a little bit differently, because now we're looking at sometimes business journals and business writings and things of that nature. So let's talk about the objectives this week as we take a look at Module 3, and it talks about gathering that documentation together so that we can take a look at what's going on within the company, and we can also look at industry benchmarks. Okay, so we're going to kind of take a look at that information this week. We did that a little bit already, but we're going to dive deeper into the subject in terms of the research and the readings this week, in addition to the assignments. And then we're going to evaluate the current state of the organization to see where people are at. And I want to stress the importance of utilizing the research, gang. It's not just about, I'm going to throw a citation in there, but if you're talking about an idea or concept, make sure that you're supporting this with the information from the research. I tell students often, I don't care what you think as much as what the research is telling you. What are you getting from the research to validate your arguments? I think that's really important. And so this week, there are a number of articles. It's going to take you some time to go through these. It is important that you read and understand this information. And in reviewing these articles, comparing it to the assignment, I can tell you that the bulk of your research is already done for your assignments this week. Okay, so focus on the readings here, and they're probably going to take up 90 to 100% of research that you might need for your submissions this week. And so start here, choose easy, read these articles here, digest the information, and this is going to help you out greatly. So one of the references here is the thing I'm going to talk about first. I was just going to skim through some of these and talk about these submissions. But this one here in particular talks about how to summarize information. It's a short video. It's going to help you all just kind of get in touch with understanding, maybe in brief, how to summarize the information and present it in a way that's going to be most beneficial to you and your consumer as you're working with organizations in this time. And as I shared in some feedback last week, when we write a psychological report, we're writing a report based upon one person. Okay, and that report is generally, I mean, a few people can see the information, but we're just assessing what's going on with that individual. When we write a report for a company, we're, of course, taking in the data and making an assessment, some recommendations, but there might be 10 people who are going to need to sign off on the project to fix whatever the problem is. There's going to be multiple individuals that's looking at this information, so you have multiple consumers that you're working with, and summarizing information can be really important. Now, I wanted to talk about research as a whole real quick moving forward, because again, some of this stuff, maybe not. Some students I think are doing a nice job on this, and some students might need a little refresher on utilizing some research. So I highly recommend utilizing the resources available within the campus library. If you struggle, you're not able to find the articles you want, or you think it's too cumbersome, it's because you have not used the tool enough to learn the nuances of this, and you're used to just going to Google and typing in a simple question and it giving you some answers. We're looking for research on the topic, gang. We're not looking to answer the question. You are going to answer the question based upon the information that you glean from the articles, okay? And I think what happens is sometimes students get hung up in that, well, I'm just going to go to Google and I'm going to type in the question and it's going to pull up 5 articles that I can read, and it's going to help give me the answer to this. You need to understand the information so you can provide an analysis, because it's not going to be too long before people are looking at you to have the answers. And it's important that you're integrating the research in. It's important that you're using empirically derived interventions. Okay? So keep that in mind. Get off my shtick now about the research. And as I talked about this week, there's a number of articles that are highly supportive to completing the assignments this week, both the discussion post as well as the milestone submission, which I'll talk about those two here in just a moment. When we talk about training within business success, there's a lot of things to keep in mind, and the cost of training, how much it costs an employer to have an employee or to create a new employee. We lose somebody, I got to bring somebody in, I got to train them and get them up to speed, and there's a lot of costs involved in this. And so this is a really great article that talks about some of these aspects, not directly from the cost perspective, but it talks about the challenges of turnover. And so these are some things that we're going to address this week, again, in the assignment and the discussion. Next article talks about diversity in the workplace. Really important as we talk about, and what I liked about this article was that it talked about this from the perspective of, we're going to survey the company and see what the actual employees say. And they had a significant amount, it's about 70% of their workforce actually responded to this, in which half of their company felt that they had a challenge within these arenas. Now, I want to talk a little bit briefly about some of the things I might have said and some feedback this past week too, as we look at some of these things. 53.4% of the participants did not believe that the current workforce reflects the diversity of communications, etc. Okay, so when you're taking data and you're presenting it back to an individual, and you see some of the things this week too, don't think so much in, okay, the industry benchmark is a 5.2 and you're at a 5.4, so you're doing great. Or you're at a, 5.0, so you're not doing so great, because that information doesn't always have a tremendous amount of meaning. I talked about possibly using percentages or graphs or other illustrations to make this information more meaningful. And sometimes it can just be a matter of how you make the statement. 53.4% of the participants did not believe that the current workforce reflects diversity of communication. By the way, you shouldn't start a paragraph and a sentence with a number like that. So I would have said something like, the study revealed that about half of the participants didn't believe the current workforce, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is an actual study. So they're going to present the information back very accurately, but you preparing a document that's going to go to the CEO of an organization might talk a little bit more in general terms. Well, about half of your employees said that this was a problem. Okay, so talk about things in specifics and give information that's going to be relative and usable. Again, telling somebody, they got a 4.1 and the industry benchmark is a 3.9, so they did great. That doesn't have a lot of information, but talking about how much better they're doing over what is anticipated might, okay? So keep some of that stuff in mind as you go through this. The 7 dimensions here talks about some of the biggest challenges within the workplace and why people are leaving the organization, liabilities, implications, ding, ding, ding. Hold on to those thoughts for a moment, giving you a little precursor there, but we're talking about emotional exhaustion, job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and sometimes individuals just have a predisposition to leaving an organization. Like, this is going to be a little stepping stone job, so I'm always going to be looking for an out. So these are some of the things that's talked about in this article. Again, great background information. It'll help you specifically when we're talking about HR dysfunction and things of that nature. And a lot of the reason why you want to have this kind of database of knowledge in your head, gang, is you're going to need to combine the information and put things together and collaborate, using other articles, pulling in more data. And so the better understanding you have of this information, the easier it's going to be for you to do that. You also need to make an analysis from the other perspectives sometimes. Well, this talks about all the benefits. So if I have to identify the challenges, it's probably the opposite of these things. Okay, intergroup conflict. Again, we talked a little bit about this, I believe, last week. We're going to get deeper into this week when we're talking about a psychological perspective. And that's really important because that's what we bring to the table. I want you guys to think about that. Anybody, I know there's some students that specifically will go in the direction of industrial organizational psychology. Many of you will be working in organizations, and the organizations might call on you, a mental health clinic, might call on you to offer some type of perspective of what's happening with whatever survey or information. Why don't HR companies do this? Well, they do. Why don't accounting firms do this? They do. And what's the difference? Well, accounting firms are probably going to be very good at giving you a perspective from the financial implications. HR consulting companies are probably going to be really good at interpreting the law. By the way, psychologists kind of go into both camps, I think, sometimes, but we also bring the emotional component to it. We help people understand the people as opposed to just looking at actual raw numbers or dollars and cents, because sometimes it's about more than that. Often it's about more than that. So That's what this article is about. And so it's taking a look at some things. How do we measure these things? How do we understand the information? The next article talks about different perspectives of groupthink. And so this is a really good article to just give you a different idea, a multi-dimensional idea of how groupthink impacts an organization. Feedback, very important. Feedback is not just about telling somebody that they're bad, sick, and wrong, but helping them to understand what the challenges are. I'm kidding about the first part. So helping individuals understand this and the functions of it. Okay, the hows and whys, and how can we fix this, and how can we work together to fix this. I do a lot of coaching on helping individuals just give feedback. It's not about like saying, you did this, but about, my experience was this, when I saw this kind of thing, this is how I felt, this is how I saw it. So you're not really attacking the individual, but I digress, different class. But think about that, just understanding that information. There's a couple more articles this week, gang, and that's why I talked about this and kind of going through this a little bit to just give you a general roadmap. Organizational culture and leadership. This is kind of giving us a theoretical framework. Okay, and so we're talking about understanding how that empathic leadership style can be very beneficial. Okay, so again, diving into some of this stuff, it directly applies to the assignments, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. Annual insights. One of the biggest things in terms of industrial organizational stuff, and this is where I say, under that umbrella, there's like the IO focus guys, which deal a lot with numbers. They deal a lot with data. And then you have more consultants or coaches that kind of come in and do training and help understand that. Now, we're doing both things, but some people are just a little better at the data part of it. Some people are a little better at the training and coaching part of it. That would be me, by the way. And so these are some of the things to help understand. The good news is, from my perspective, is I have a bachelor's in business management as well as a master's in business administration. And so these are some things that I've gone through a lot of education on to help understand what we're looking at when we look at these reports and these insights. And so this is some good information for those of you who are just not understanding the importance of some of these. There's something in here on LinkedIn, benchmarking key strategy for organizational success. Generally, gang, again, this is an informational kind of article. You can certainly use it because it's assigned this week, but think in terms of, as I always stress to students, we're not using social media very often. This person probably has some good credibility, and obviously there's a faculty member on our campus that felt it valuable, and it is a valuable article. But again, I want to stress the importance of using primary and secondary research as much as possible. The more you do that, the easier it's going to be for you to do that. So let's talk specifically about the assignments this week. This is going to be kind of a quickie because I think you guys are on track by and large with this, and this is just to provide some clarification. Summarize the human experience you had involving either training, feedback, groupthink, intergroup conflict, and explain the situation. And again, let me go back to saying, if you're reading through these articles this week, gang, it's going to be super easy for you to go, hey, you know what? I remember what that was called in that article about groupthink. And you have an example. In fact, while you're reading the article, you're probably going to have examples that pop up in your head. This is a great way for you to take that information and what the article was talking about to support your analysis, how the human process helped this situation, how it hindered the situation, etc. So again, you have that rich understanding of the information, put this together. And by the way, do your best to do your discussion posts earlier in the week as opposed to later in the week. I know a lot of students, we see a lot of discussion posts that will come in between 6 p.m. and say midnight on Thursday night. But I always say, plan for the unexpected. Anticipate that something could happen or go wrong in your week and get in the habit of scheduling these things. Gang, I do this a lot. I'm like, okay, I got an hour to do this. And I do whatever I need to do in an hour, and then I move on to the next task. You can absolutely do this too with your discussion posts, blocking out those times, but specifically saying, I'm going to do this Wednesday night. There are certain things I do religiously every single week. So you got to put yourself into that mindset. It's going to help you be successful, but getting done early will help alleviate the stress that many of you might feel from those deadlines as the week unfolds. The assignment this week, and I want to stress this, we're going to start talking about Project 2 milestone. So Project 1 is going to take place next week, and this is already the setup for Project 2, okay? I know it sounds a little counterintuitive there, but we did in week 1 and week 2 work towards some of the stuff that we're going to work on in Project 1, which is going to be coming up next week. Now this is getting us a jump start on Project 2. Again, if you've done all those readings, this is going to be a heck of a lot easier for you because you're going to understand this stuff just going into it, okay? There's a couple of documents here that you're going to look to add some additional information so you can understand things such as how to pull it up on the screen in Microsoft Word. I'm kidding. Some background information, mission statement of the company, organizational structure, and there was also some additional data that you're going to be utilizing for this particular submission, taking a look at this stuff. And again, we can present the data in a lot of different ways, gang. What I wanted to stress to you was when we look at some of these things overall, particularly when we're talking about benchmarks, we might, talk more in terms of a percentage or visual representation or what those numbers actually mean, as opposed to, 3.5 versus 3.9. This, by the way, is really solid too. Does anybody know what this type of information is called versus this type of information? Okay, this should be something that's very intuitive to you. So understand the difference between these two tools right here, these types of metrics, and how to talk about this data, okay? Oh my gosh, I just realized it's right there on the middle of the screen. All right, I digress. Some of this is on the fly, obviously. So when you're going through this submission this week, again, think in terms of we're identifying these things, and I want to stress this, support your ideas. Support your ideas. That means this is not just you rambling something off the top of your head, but rather integrating that research that you got from the readings, kind of pulling that information together to talk about the stuff here. Your analysis of the data and the direction that you're heading with this, saying, here's some of the challenges that I see within the people, within the human resource process or culture, whatever the case might be, is supported by the research that'll help validate your information. As it talks about here, and I stress this to you all, the way you present your information is even more important in a business setting than it is in a psychological setting. Now, gang, I want to stress to you, always think in terms of how does my document look to other people? And so if there's different size fonts and your margins are uneven and things are all wacky all over your submission, it detracts from the readability. It kind of pulls things down a little bit. So work toward having a solid APA submission. It will help you tremendously because it's something you're going to have to do extensively when you get to graduate school. And I was like, I'm going to teach those 600 level classes and 800 level. I'm like, okay, I'm not teaching APA. You guys need help with APA. Get the manual, go to the tutors, one of those two things and get some help. Now we're going to do a little more coaching on that stuff here and certainly be understanding, but just know that that type of writing is going to be more important to you as you progress, mostly in your next program, right? Your master's program and beyond. 4 to 5 page Microsoft Word document, 12 point. That's just a standard Times New Roman font, 12 point. 1-inch margins. I mean, those are just some of the basics of APA formatting. But again, I've encouraged you all to use like headers to identify your information. Wow, gee, look how easy this would be. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different headers. You got a couple of ideas. Now, again, if you just have people positive attitudes as a header, and then you have 2 paragraphs underneath that, I'm going to get that. I'm going to understand that, right? These all kind of go together. But what happens is sometimes gang, we have this tendency to write something and then maybe we went into a second or third paragraph. Now things aren't lining up, and now myself or a reader basically is having to look back and forth and understand what section they're in to find important information, as opposed to quickly and easily finding the information. Remember, think back to that video that you should have watched at the beginning, in addition to just making it easy. And again, if you're writing an APA format, it fits with this perfectly, because these would be all level 1 headings throughout your submission. It'd be really easy. You can do level 2 headings if you choose as well for these second things, but that's not really that necessary. Again, if you just have 2 paragraphs, or again, practice, put it in there, make it make sense and work for you. But again, think probably in terms of roughly a page for each one of these. I know it says 4 to 5 pages, but generally speaking, a paragraph is 5 sentences or more. In terms of a paper submission like what we're doing now, 2 solid paragraphs like that with headers and things of that nature in APA format is probably going to be close to a page. Okay, so I'm just throwing that out there in terms of expectations. Put more depth in, and one of the best ways to do that is to incorporate research. That all works together, right? All just kind of goes hand in hand. Last but not least, I did want to talk about, just to put this reminder in you, this week we have that milestone submission for project 2. It's however they do the alignment of the assignments. It's always like, oh, we're looking on project 1 next week, but starting project 2 this week. So there's a little bit of an overlap, but think in terms of this. Take a look at this information as you wrap up the end of the week, because again, this is some of the stuff that we've been talking about. You're going to integrate some of this information. And again, if you've been keeping up with the readings in the course and putting the time and energy into your milestones, your projects are much easier. That's just true for every class. Gang, a little side tip, okay? So submit this again. Look at that. 5 sections, 4 to 5 pages. Anticipate roughly a page, page and a half for each section. I don't care if y'all run along a little long. That's fine, but think in terms of putting good information in there. Make sure you're covering the information. You don't have to ramble on for 5 pages when it only takes a page. But it's certainly okay to run on a little long, especially if you're providing some good research in there. So if you have any questions, gang, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope all of this made sense, and I hope you're all enjoying the class thus far. I look forward to engaging with you in the discussion post this week, and I look forward to seeing your submissions at the end of the week. I'm off to go grade. Have a great week.